Hey guys, how's it going? I just earlier made a video about the representation of Cleopatra as black in the new Netflix documentary, and I just wanted to give kind of a part 2 to that, because I got some comments that don't really seem to have understood what I was trying to say, and that's on me if I wasn't making myself clear. Or in any case, it's kind of to be expected. This is an inflammatory topic, and that's why I was talking about it in the first place. I'd seen a lot of debate or hot takes, and I felt that some of them were coming from the wrong place. And I think that even if you ultimately arrive to the same conclusion, that you can do so for the wrong reasons. So yes, I would have picked someone else if I had casted the movie, but it has nothing to do with Jada Pinkett Smith in a vacuum. To briefly summarize what I said, it doesn't really matter what race an actor is, but Netflix was in the wrong for presenting a historical person and purporting that there was some question to what her ethnicity was. Particularly in a landscape of underrepresentation for people who are, for lack of better words, brown, tan, or tawny, when we as Americans tend to only think in terms of black and white. There's one particular comment I wanted to highlight, and I don't mean this person any ill will or condescension. It and my response are on screen now if you'd like to read them in full, but in essence the claim is that I was coming from a place of bias and wouldn't care if people were being represented as lighter rather than darker. Now, I don't think that's a fair assessment, particularly when I said and explicated in the video that this was by no means a one-sided opinion and that I dislike the Aryan Jesus just as much as the black Cleopatra. Particularly since you've some actual groups that define themselves in around notions of ethnic supremacy in regards to Christian whiteness or, on the other hand, Egyptian blackness. But if it does help my position to reference specifically examples of adjusting the brightness up rather than down, I'm more than happy to do so. And I'll use the two examples he provided. Let's look at Gods of Egypt. Now, I've never seen this movie, and I don't have any intention to. It looks like some kind of Marvel-esque flashing colors bullshit. But I did watch the trailer, and you'll be happy to know that this is another instance of people in the ancient world having posh British accents. And I'll put up a picture of the film's main cast. Now, it doesn't take a whole lot of brain power to understand that the majority of these white faces would be burnt to a crisp under the Egyptian sun. Now, a couple of them do resemble something like a Cleopatra, but of course Cleopatra wasn't Egyptian in an ethnic sense. She was a sort of colonizer. Egyptians don't come in ivory. This movie, as you can imagine, was not without some very justified controversy when it released. Nikolai Coster-Waldau, the top-billed actor who plays Horus in the film, responded to the controversy by saying this: "A lot of people are getting really worked up online about the fact that I'm a white actor. I'm not even playing an Egyptian. I'm an 8-foot-tall god who turns into a falcon." I understand this argument, but I do not agree with it. For context, a similar argument gets used for things like comic book characters. You've undoubtedly heard the retort that it's just a fictional character when some kind of Batman or Spider-Man adjacent character is depicted in film as a different color than they were in the comic books. And for comic book characters, I agree, it is just a fictional character. And you could say, in a Reddit atheist type of way, that a deity worshipped by a major civilization is just the fictional character, but you'd be doing so disingenuously. The idea of a people's god, when that god was actually worshipped by a historical group of people, is inextricably tied to that people. And I'm of the belief that a misrepresentation of a god like that is a misrepresentation of its people. I'll concede that there is some difference in a technical way, and in that same notion that this misrepresentative work of fiction is less bad than a misrepresentation of historical people. But it's still shitty, and in 2016 they should have known it was shitty. By the exact same line of thinking as with Cleopatra, no one who worked on this film could really have claimed ignorance to the fact that Egypt is a very important part of our cultural memory, and that it has become somewhat of a battleground in that politico-historical imagination. People who are ethnically Egyptian, or if someone wants to rant to me about what exactly the Egyptian ethnicity is, has changed over time with the various migrations and changes of regime, then let's just say that people who look even vaguely like how the Egyptians represented themselves during the admittedly broad period of time in which they worshipped Horus and Thoth, which is to say brown, are sorrowfully underrepresented in Hollywood. Why couldn't they have thrown them a bone? There's no reason why the gods of Egypt shouldn't have looked like Egyptians. Now, to be practical, I do understand that Hollywood movies are not meant to be corrective strides in terms of politics. though I do think things are trending more towards that nowadays. So I would understand the line of thinking that, one, there are probably fewer big-name actors who drive ticket sales who are also Egyptian, and two, it is unfortunately probably the case that an American or Australian audience may have some disinterest in a movie that exclusively stars people who are neither white nor black. To be clear, this is not a moral cosign of the argument, this is just a recognition of unfortunate hurdles. To the first, I'd respond that, though I'm not a huge movie guy myself, I don't know who the fuck most of these actors are anyway. And even if there is some scarcity of ethnic Egyptians, I think it would really suffice just as well to hire people who may be any kind of Arabic, or even Latino or Indian. I think it misses the point that this sort of thing is about being able to pass some 23andMe test to match the actual ancestry of the sort of character you're playing. It doesn't matter if you are the exact same genetic makeup. All that I and most people who are taking qualm with this sort of transracial casting for historical people are asking for is that the visuals are somewhat representative of the historical reality. I think that when you take some element of history and transfer it to the emphatically visual medium of film, then it ought to look decent. We have to recognize the more recent history and the current discourse over these sort of battleground areas of history as they pertain to the cultural imagining. Yes, I'll fully admit, white as I am, that there has been a lot of problematic miscasting for all sort of historical personages with Northern European-looking actors. And that whitewashing can genuinely mislead people to assume that the major historical figures, even in places such as the literal desert of Egypt, were white. And I don't think it needs to be explained the sort of conclusions that a person can come to if they're in that line of thinking. And specifically when it pertains to Egypt, there's a problem with misinformation that Egyptians were darker than they were, and it's turned into a conspiracy whereby people think that there's some sort of hidden truth of a history where sub-Saharan Africans were the sole shapers of the world and are being denied a mythical legacy. Both of these things are allowed to be bad, and both of these things should be considered when you're dealing with the legacy of Egypt in what is, again, an emphatically visual medium. And look, these are gods rather than humans, so in the name of diversity in this movie, if you don't want to make them all a racially homogeneous group, then that's fine. In fact, it would be representative of Egypt's ruling class, which throughout the incredibly long period of time that Egypt was around, has gone through different various kingdoms and lineages of rulers, and was itself most certainly not racially homogeneous. Again, you have figures like the Ptolemies, but not just them. There are also the Hyksos rulers of the 15th dynasty, a group of people who were Levantine in origin, and of course you have the 25th dynasty of the Napatans, a Kushite or Nubian people who were literally black pharaohs. So there still can be diversity. Have one or two people who are lighter, have one or two people who are darker, but for fuck's sake, give us a few people who look Egyptian. Now, the other movie in question was Exodus, Gods and Kings. This is one that leaves no room for the fictional character defense. Now, the actor who plays Ramses II, Joel Edgerton, while being very Germanic, is also goofy-looking enough to at least resemble some of the physiognomic idiosyncrasies I've seen in reconstructions of the pharaoh. This is also with the use of practically race-altering makeup, which in itself may be a sensitive issue. Overall, the same things apply. Could have gotten an Egyptian guy. The other big name in the movie is Christian Bale, who plays Moses, and honestly, as to the question of whether or not Bale might resemble Moses, I will express some hesitancy in my answer. It's kind of a big issue in like Israel nowadays. Not so much Moses in particular, but there's a broader discourse tinged with colorism, and there are implications to the various conclusions you could come to, though Moses certainly wasn't a Northern European man. And also, it's just weird that they didn't use a Jewish actor. Not to be stereotypical, but it just isn't the case that there's some dearth of Jewish actors in Hollywood. Also, it would have been fun to give Moses a stutter. The Midrash has it that Moses did have a stutter when he spoke. That's why his brother did much of the public speaking, and that difficulty is somewhat important to understand Moses' hesitancy in being the mouthpiece of God, and even has some more esoteric implications for his character. Again, it's established in the rabbinic tradition that Moses' soul was of Tohu, the realm of chaos, and this made him have some difficulty in communicating with people. Now, whether or not you would consider that a historical feature, particularly if the intended audience was Christian rather than Jewish, I include it as a small reminder that the extent of historicity in a film does go, of course, beyond race. For example, the film also features animals that most likely would not have been in Egypt at the time. Elements are shown as beasts of burden for construction, and it's unlikely that that would have been the case. Same thing with camels, which actually weren't imported into Egypt until the Persian era, some 800 years later. Other anachronisms include horseshoes, mounted archery, and steel blades. And this isn't entirely just playing a game of spotting anachronisms. These things can have implications that stretch into the current day. In fact, this movie, set in Egypt, is actually banned in Egypt. For a few reasons, sure, but namely because the film gives the impression that the Jews built the pyramids, which, political implications aside, is a pervasive myth and historical falsehood. I'll sign off here. I don't really have a whole lot to say, and my skill set just isn't Egyptology, so I can't pull out as many facts as I did for the last one. But I hope I've gotten my message across. And again, thank you guys for listening. And we will do something a little less serious next time. Thanks.